I don't know if you guys noticed it when you came in or not, but out there in the foyer is a display specifically today for Memorial Day. And what it is a set of uniforms that I have personally bought myself of a naval chaplain who served in World War II. And out there you will not only see his naval uniform as a chaplain, but also his Marine Corps uniform, because the ship that he was on was torpedoed by the Japanese. And while they were repairing that ship, they blessed him enough to send him to the Marines so he could go to Okinawa. Wow, that is really going out of the frying pan into the fire. So, but you know, if you have the opportunity, you can take pictures, stuff, stand there by it, whatever. That is an actual 48-star flag that they fought underneath of in World War II, World War I and World War II, believe it or not. So enjoy that. I hope you guys do enjoy it and take a look at it. Some of his information is out there as well. So today, the sermon is Soldiers of God Sacrificed in Battle. You see, some of the times, that's why I specifically have that display out there. We seem to forget. Yeah, we may remember that there were chaplains that were in the military during many of the different wars throughout the history of the United States. There were men who were there on the battlefield that were chaplains, who were there to minister the Word of God in tough times, in easier times, to have worship services, and all the things that people who wanted to worship God wanted to be able to do, even though they were in some tough and trying situations. Now, if you can imagine, there were a lot of different times throughout those situations when chaplains themselves were caught in some difficult situations. So I'm going to kind of go through some of this, and I'm hoping that I can make it through it. I've kind of tested this stuff, so hopefully we'll all be all right. Now, Rick sat there and took the first verse that I'm using. Yeah. All right. So, but that is perfectly fine, because I think it is a verse that speaks very well about the subject I'm talking about today. John 15:13-14 says, "Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Now, what Rick didn't say was this part here. "You are my friends if you do what I command." You see, the command that sometimes we forget is that Jesus says no matter where we are, where we go, what we participate in, what the situation is, we have a responsibility as a Christian to share our faith out of love. And that's where it really gets to be difficult at times, isn't it? Because it's nice to do it when it's easy. It's harder to do it when the situation is more difficult. But we do it out of love. It's not for scalps. It's not for this. It's not for anything else like that. It's because we love them. That is the reason we share the gospel with people, because we know where we're going to go. We know what's going to happen with us, and we sure would love to have everybody there, because we don't like the alternative that they're going to have to face. Now, you also have those situations within the militaries throughout history. So I'm going to go through a little bit of stuff here and some information for you guys. Chaplains, World War II. Nearly 100 U.S. Army, Navy, Marine chaplains were killed in action during World War II. I bet that was a figure that most of you probably had no idea of, that there were 100 men as chaplains who died on the battlefield for Jesus Christ and for those soldiers. I had no idea that that was that high, but I'm going to give you some other little facts and figures here that I didn't put up there yet. There were almost between 8,000 to 10,000 chaplains who served during World War II alone. Okay? 5,620 of them were Protestants. 2,278 of them were Catholics. 243 of them were Jewish, etc., etc., etc. Now, all total during World War II, 478 of those chaplains either died, were wounded, missing in action, or were captured in POWs. That's a lot of guys. That's a lot of men that sacrificed their freedoms, their rights, their privileges as Americans for the cause of those men in uniform who are going out there to defend us our rights, our freedoms, and our liberties. And those men were sacrificed. Some of them gave their lives. Some of them just gave of their freedoms and stuff of this nature. But each and every one of them were there serving God as they felt called to witness in these situations. So what I've talked about a lot here is, naturally, like I said, the display out there is World War II. I'm going to kind of concentrate on World War II for chaplains here. And I'm going to go through a few of these guys. And like I said, I hope I can get through some of these situations here by myself. So naturally, if we're going to start talking about chaplains in World War II, we've got to go to the beginning. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Of course, a lot of us know what happened on December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy and these situations and stuff. But let me tell you a little bit about, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about a chaplain. The USS Oklahoma, which is pictured there, which was in the other picture as well, a lot of you may not know, so I'm going to fill you in a little bit. Oh, the USS Oklahoma was BB battleship number 37. Number 37 was harbored there, was on the pier there in Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant J.G. Chaplain Aloysius, oh boy, this was a name, Aloysius Herman Schmidt was aboard the USS Oklahoma. On December 7, 1941, the U.S. Navy chaplain Schmidt from St. Lucius, Iowa, was performing Mass aboard the battleship USS Oklahoma in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, when that ship was attacked and struck by 5 Japanese torpedoes. Chaplain Schmidt was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for saving 12 sailors' lives that day and became the first U.S. chaplain to die during World War II. And like I said, he received the Silver Star, and his commendation in the Silver Star I'm going to read to you now. The President of the United States of America takes pride in presenting the Silver Star posthumously to Lieutenant Junior Grade Chaplain Aloysius Herman Schmidt, Navy serial number, I'm going to skip that part, United States Navy, for heroism involving voluntary risk of life, not involving conflict with an armed enemy. While serving as a chaplain on board the USS Oklahoma during the attack by Japanese forces at Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by the Japanese on December the 7th, 1941, Chaplain Schmidt was aboard the USS Oklahoma when that vessel capsized. He was entrapped in a compartment where he had done Mass, where only a very small porthole provided outlet for escape. With unselfish disregard for his own plight, Chaplain Schmidt assisted his shipmates through that porthole. While the shipmates were in the process of rescuing him and pulling him out, his body became wedged in the opening of the porthole. Realizing that other men were also behind him trying to get out, as they came into that compartment looking for a way out, Chaplain Schmidt insisted that they push him back in to the ship so that these other men might be able to escape. Calmly, he sat there and urged them on with a pronouncement of his blessings as he remained behind while they crawled out to safety and he lost his life. Now here was a guy that had sit there and he gave his life for others. Not in a battle situation like a lot of people did. You know, you hear a lot of those stories. But he was a chaplain sitting there on the ship, and he gave his life for the cause of Jesus Christ. I am going to sacrifice my life for the salvation of these other men. He had to know that through his mind, he sat there and he thought, well, I know where I'm going, but I don't know about these guys. They needed to be saved. They needed to have that opportunity of life and liberty and stuff. And he gave his life so that others may live in the hopes of salvation. Now that is really sacrificing and showing the love of Jesus Christ and doing what we are commanded to do. And these chaplains are caught in situation after situation after situation like that. I can't even begin to imagine what it was like for him. In some ways I can, in other ways I can't. I was never served in the military, but I did serve overseas, willing to sacrifice my life for the cause of the kingdom of Jesus Christ for the salvation of souls in other countries. And sometimes we have to sit there and ask, are we willing? Are we really willing to do that for the sake of other people? Put our lives in harm's way. Now, I'm going to go on to another one here. February the 28th, so just a few months later, but here again, now we've moved from 1941 to 1942. In the Java and Sunda Strait. Now, I don't know if a lot of you know where that is at. Java is Indonesia. You see, the Japanese were coming through there, and they took the Philippines and stuff. They were heading down to Australia, and so they were taking the Indonesia because they needed Indonesia for the oil to keep their machine going, their military machine. And we just had a couple little ships there. The Australians had a couple little ships, and the British had a couple of ships. The Dutch had a couple of ships. And so it was just a couple of ships here and there where they all got together to try to slow down this dreadnought of the Japanese heading south and taking over all of this stuff. Now, one of those ships that was involved in that was the USS Houston, an armored cruiser, CA number 30. On that cruiser was Commander Chaplain George Snavely Rentz. Okay? Now, Chaplain Rentz had already served in World War I and was pushing 60 years old at this time when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December of 1941. Nevertheless, he was soon in the thick of things, serving aboard the heavy cruiser USS Houston. Before this date, the Houston and those other ships tried to attack the Japanese, and some of them got sunk, and the Houston was damaged badly. The Houston would be hit again on this date in February as she was passing through the Sunda Straits. The chaplain was the oldest man on board that ship. He didn't want to be wearing a life jacket while other younger sailors didn't have any. He kept trying to give his life jacket away as they were swimming in the ocean and the ship had sunk. He kept trying to give away his life jacket and saying, "You men are young. Your lives are still ahead of you," he said. "I am old. I have lived generously and had fun." His pleas fell on deaf ears. His men loved him and kept ignoring his attempts to give away his own life. Walter Beeson, who was badly burned and barely clinging to the stuff of the pontoon that was keeping them afloat. Commander Rentz removed his life jacket and shoved it towards that young seaman who was hurting and wounded. He said a quick prayer and quietly swam away. No one realized what happened, Benson said later. It's just one of those things that one minute he's there, and the next minute you look around and you take a head count, and sure enough, he wasn't there anymore. Rentz was never seen again, but Beeson was later captured by the Japanese with some of the other survivors of the USS Houston. He was held as a prisoner of war until the end of the war itself. He likely wouldn't have made it had it not been for Commander Rentz giving him his life jacket. Chaplain Rentz was awarded the U.S. Navy Cross posthumously, making him the only Navy chaplain to be so honored during World War II. There again, one of those kind of situations where I know sometimes we sit there and think, well, would we as older people, I know myself, I would give up my life for younger people, sacrifice your life for them. They've got, like Rentz said, you've got your life ahead of you. I know where I'm going. I know what's happening. I'm okay with that. And this man gave up his life for the salvation of others. And he was awarded posthumously for that. You know, he didn't do it to get the Navy Cross. Neither did the other guy do it to get the Silver Star. They did it because of their love for Jesus Christ and other human beings that God had called them there to do. God called them to be a servant of Jesus Christ, not by word only, but also by deed. To live the talk and to walk the walk. I am a servant of Jesus Christ, and I will do whatever he needs me to do in the situations I am in. Now here's another one. It's also called the Four Chaplains. And a lot of these guys and things, you can go on the internet and look up these stories. They will rent your heart to sit there and figure out a lot of this stuff that was going on here. Troop Transport, USAT, United States Army Transport, USS Dorchester, February the 3rd, 1943, east of Newfoundland. So we're talking in the middle of the winter, up there on the coastline, the Atlantic coast of Canada. Nice, hot water. No way. All right. Hans J. Danielson, the captain of the USAT Dorchester, had been alerted that Coast Guard sonar had detected a submarine in the area. Because German U-boats were monitoring sea lanes and had attacked and sunk ships earlier that year during the war. Captain Danielson had the ship's crew on state of high alert even before he received that information, ordering all the men to sleep in their clothing and keep their life jackets on. There were 902 men on that ship, Army personnel, and the ship's crew. Many of the soldiers were sleeping deep in the ship's hold. They disregarded the order because of the engine's heat and where they were and the suffocating air that was down in the hold of that ship. Others ignored it because the life jackets were just not comfortable to sleep in. During the early morning hours of February the 3rd, 1943, at 12:55 a.m., the vessel was torpedoed by the German submarine U-223 off of Newfoundland in the North Atlantic. Here you have Lieutenant George L. Fox, who was a Methodist chaplain, Lieutenant Alexander D. Good, who was a Jewish chaplain, Lieutenant John P. Washington, a Roman Catholic chaplain, and Lieutenant Clark V. Poling, a Dutch Reformed chaplain, who were all part of this personnel of 902 people on the boat. When that torpedo struck, it knocked out the Dorchester's electrical system, leaving the ship in total darkness from top to bottom. Panic set in naturally among the men that were on board the ship. Many of them trapped were below deck. The chaplain sought to calm the men and organize an orderly evacuation of the ship and helping guide the wounded men to safety. All the life jackets were passed out to all the men. The supply ran out before each man had one, though. The chaplains removed their own life jackets and gave them to those who had none. They helped as many men as they could into lifeboats and out into the sea to get away from the ship. And then they linked arms and saying prayers and singing hymns. They went down with the ship. Grady Clark, who was a survivor, said, "As I swam away from the ship, I looked back. The flares had ignited everything around to tell people where the ship was and the danger they were in so they could see, as it was almost like broad daylight. The bow came up high, and then she slid under the water. The last thing I saw was the four chaplains who were up there on the bow of the ship praying for the men that were going down with them. They had done everything they could. I never saw them again. They themselves did not have a chance without their life jackets. Of the 902 men who were on that ship that morning, 672 of them went down with the ship. 230 of them were saved. And 4 of them probably had the life jackets of those 4 chaplains on them as they were saved. Those 4 chaplains were heading over to Europe to be able to minister to Army personnel and to help them out and to minister to them, and they never made it. But yet they sacrificed their lives in the cold Atlantic Ocean, giving up their life jackets for the salvation of other souls. Here again, chaplains gave up their lives for the salvation of other people. Are we willing to sacrifice, that kind of a sacrifice, for the salvation of others? We have the opportunities, not necessarily that we have to die for them, but are we willing to give what we can for the salvation of other folks? 4 chaplains in one moment, gone from 4 different faiths, who were ministering to other people for the cause of God. These are stories that I hope that will touch your hearts as we sit there and we think about Memorial Day, not just about, like I know we're going to after a while, have good old American hot dogs and potato salad and coleslaw and et cetera, or listening to the race, which is all fine and well and great. But it's like a lot of holidays, sometimes we forget what's behind it. Why? What are the sacrifices? What are the things that we are supposed to remember? And a lot of times we think about those trigger pullers that were out there on the field of fire who have died and tossed their body on a hand grenade or whatever else. But nobody ever talks about the chaplains. Nobody ever talks about those guys who weren't out there shooting or doing anything, hand grenades, shooting artillery or any of that other stuff. They were guys there just ministering to men who got a Dear John letter when they were going overseas. That once they found out when they were overseas, they wind up finding out their mother or father passed away, their grandma, their brother, their sister. Their brother may have died in another theater in battle. All of those hard things in life that those men had to endure, plus the battles and the situations that they had to live in, being shot at and somebody trying to kill them every day. Just one thing after another, piled on, piled on, piled on. And who could they depend upon to be that calm in the storm? The chaplains. And the chaplains were there in harm's way a lot of different times. We'll go to another one here, just so you guys don't think I'm only talking about the Navy. All right. Lieutenant Chaplain Ignatius Maternowski is who we're going to talk about. June 6, 1944, D-Day, Normandy. And I'm sure a lot of us have thought about D-Day and Normandy. It's actually, I've seen they're going to be coming out with a new movie about D-Day and all this. I sit there and I pulled this picture off, and it was a picture of paratroopers going to go in on Normandy. I want you to look at the second guy on the left. Look at that face. How young does he look? Does he look like he's even out of high school? And he's going to jump out of an airplane behind enemy lines to fight for our freedoms and give his life if need be. That picture just absolutely blew me away as I was looking at all those faces down through there. I seen a couple of older guys on the far right, but those guys on the left. Tears your heart out to think of what they're going to do, and some of them are never going to be able to go home to their parents, never get married, never have children. So let's talk about Ignatius Maternowski, Lieutenant Chaplain. In the pre-dawn hours, he was a pre-dawn hours of June 6th, 1944, U.S. Army Chaplain Father Ignatius Maternowski parachuted behind German lines near Gotteville, France, a small village in Normandy, with the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. Their aim and mission was to secure and hold bridges to help the Allied invasion advance deeper into enemy territory and help the men get off the beach. But the paratroopers had gotten scattered all over in their drop zone and quickly came under fire individually until they could start to come together. Also, an American glider had come in and crashed nearby, and those survivors came out and joined this small group of men. Casualties were mounting. A small grocery store is where they wound up collecting themselves to be a medevac area. It was makeshift first aid station. But there were too many wounded, and they were also in occupied enemy territory. The wounded needed help, more help than he or the medics could provide at that moment. And with no identification of this building as a medical station, they could come under attack at any moment. It was a dangerous situation that needed to be corrected. Chaplain Maternowski, in a bold and risky move, removed his military helmet, displaying his chaplain's insignias and a Red Cross armband, bravely walked out into the street towards the enemy lines, hoping to negotiate medical care for those wounded soldiers who were in this market building. He actually accomplished his task in negotiating that with the German military, that they would take care of these wounded soldiers. He then turned around and began to return to the American side of the battle lines. As he got closer, he was shot in the back by an enemy sniper and died on the spot, becoming the only U.S. chaplain to be killed on D-Day. His legacy endures as a symbol of courage, faith, and selfless service. So here again, and as I sit there and I think about that picture of all those young men, some of them could have been ones that were wounded. They were there. They had to take care. He wanted to take care of these wounded soldiers, to give them every kind of care and everything that they needed, that he could provide some medical assistance, but a lot of spiritual stuff as they are approaching, some of them are approaching death and maiming the rest of their lives. And he went and negotiated with an enemy so that they would be taken care of. He was successful in the mission he went after. But somebody else decided to snuff out his life. He sacrificed his life for the salvation of those men and an opportunity for their souls to be saved later. The kind of sacrifice that some of these guys did is absolutely incredible. Each and every one of these that we've done so far, I hope you can begin to understand the sacrifice that these chaplains went through. Not carrying firearms, not carrying hand grenades, not carrying bazookas, not carrying anything except the Word of God in a situation. And yet their lives were taken away through different circumstances because of their willingness to serve God in tough situations. A real sacrifice of things. Now, just a couple of days later, on June the 8th, D-Day, Normandy beach still. Just a couple of days after D-Day, amid the shattered fields of Normandy, a quiet scene unfolded in the chaos of these battles. A U.S. Army chaplain had crawled through the gunfire to reach a dying soldier that he had seen. He did make it to him, just in time to whisper the final words of prayer over this young soldier, to this soldier who was dying on the battlefield. Later, when medics and a war correspondent photographer arrived on that scene, they found both men had died. The chaplain's arms were caressing the young soldier, and the chaplain, too, was dead. A Bible lay open on the ground, stained with the blood of both of those soldiers. The war photographer correspondent captured the moment with trembling hands, and then he had to turn and walk away with shaking hands and continue his job as a war photographer. Later on, after he developed the film and remembered seeing the picture, he sent it back with a caption. And that caption that he put underneath this picture was, "Two prayers finished together." Both the dying soldier and the chaplain probably able to say amen together as they went to meet their Maker. There this chaplain was. He crawled out there and he'd helped this young soldier in his time of need, sharing with him and giving him the encouragement and the blessings that he needed. And yet he also gave up his life in that situation for the cause of God and those that he was there to help and minister to in so many other ways. Now, we went through 1941, 42, 43, and 44. The war ended in 1945. Just a few days before the end of the war, on July 30th, 1945, there was a United States cruiser heading west of Guam towards Leyte in the Philippines. On July 30th, 1945, you guys will recognize this, the USS Indianapolis was en route from Guam to Leyte in the Philippines when she was torpedoed and sunk by the Japanese submarine within the first hours of July 30th. 300 of the men on that ship went down with it, 1,000 of the 1,195 crew members. About 895 of the crew members went into the water. With them was Lieutenant Thomas M. Conway aboard the USS Indianapolis heavy cruiser CA-35. And hundreds of his shipmates were floating around in the water. Now, I know a lot of you have probably heard a lot more of information about the USS Indianapolis, and I'm going to tell you, if you haven't, please go down to the War Memorial and look at that and begin to understand what these guys went through. It is heartrending. Completely disregarding his own well-being, Lieutenant Chaplain Thomas Conway continually swam through the waves between some of the clusters of sailors who were adrift that he could see and reach, many of whom were badly and severely injured. He was providing them with encouragement, comfort, prayer as he went from sailor to sailor. After 3 days of tireless exertion to aid his shipmates to pray and encourage them, Lieutenant Commander Conway finally himself succumbed to exhaustion and died in the ocean. His efforts were credited as a major reason why those 67 nearby shipmate sailors of his who were grouped together were ultimately encouraged enough to survive and be saved. So 67 out of the 300 and some sailors who were rescued off of the USS Indianapolis after 4 or 5 days in the ocean with nothing to eat or drink were saved just a couple days before the end of the war. Here again, a chaplain gave his life in a story a lot of us know about the USS Indianapolis. I've heard a lot of stories about the Indianapolis. I never heard that story. But there were chaplains on a lot of these ships. There were chaplains on a lot of these battlefields. There were guys who were out there ministering to those men in some of the toughest situations they could ever go through, which a lot of people describe as hell on earth. And yet they were there to comfort, encourage, and bless those around them. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Now, I know I've talked about the military stuff here, but we are fighting a battle, are we not, for the cause of Jesus Christ? We are in a spiritual battle, each and every one of us, each and every day. We are called, just like these chaplains, to be in the battle. Are we willing to go into that battle with what we need, which is the Word of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ, to share? What kind of sacrifices are we willing to make so that they will understand the gospel, that they will be able to go to heaven, that they will have those opportunities? Are we in the battle, or do we want to just sit back in the rear echelon areas and be glad we're not shot at? We are in a spiritual battle. And the last scripture that I want to share with you, where in the world did that wind up going? All right. 1 John 3:16. Not John 3:16, but 1 John 3:16. After I wrote this, I wound up running across this in a devotion. I said, this is where I've got to end this. This is how we know what love is. Love. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and John finishes the thought. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and those who still need salvation. Are we willing to make that sacrifice?